Hello, and this video is going to show you how these models were made in Houdini. So this is a modular kit that I used to build my pillars for the Wave Function Collab project. So in here you see the 5 models that I made to build multiple pillars. So here's then 2 examples of what you could do. You can quickly adjust what you need, and I can get more variation with this modular kit. When I started the Wave Function Collab project, I wanted to make as less models as possible and try to make simple but modular models. Now in Houdini, let's start building these pillars. So let's start out with geometry network. And in here, I'm going to start out with using a curve node. So I can basically draw a shape. Then I'm going to enable my grid to be sure it's on. And I'm going to switch to the right view. You can either go here, set right view, or use the shortcuts. Then I'm also going to select my handle to draw the line and also enable snapping. So we have here different snapping, and in this case we want of course to snap on the grid. So let's click here our line, and for now I'm gonna stick to the grid and build something that looks like this, and press enter when you're done. And you can go back into perspective mode. So if right now we would press number 2 on the keyboard, we would switch to point mode, which will allow us to select points. And then, for example, when we press T, I can then move them more. So now I can basically tweak the shape a bit more in what I'm looking for. Then from here, I'm going to bevel this point over here so we can select it. And when I press C, I have a quick modeling menu. You can enable this modeling menu by going here and selecting polymodeling. Then when pressing C, we have this menu, go to bevel mode and release C key. And now a bevel node is being created over here. So we can now set certain distance and also have a nice round effect. So we can increase this, and it's automatically also snapping here. So now we can choose how my pillar will go. And we can always go backwards here to our edit, and we can play around here with how this arc is going to go. So maybe I want something that's not too much. Maybe we can even move this. So we can play around with this edit node a bit to move where our arc will go. And I think something like this could be great. Now after that, I'm going to extrude this. So you can just type extrude, or you can also use extrude over here in this menu for modeling, which can be useful. And just extrude the shape. And I'm also going to enable output back, so it's a closed shape now. Then from here, I'm going to use the X as a line. So this is going to make sure my model is perfectly in the middle of my world. So before it was not perfectly in the middle, so now it's perfectly aligned. Then going to place down a fuse node to clean up the geometry a bit more, because there is chance that there are some overlapping points. Then I'm going to select edges I want to bevel. So we go into edge mode here and selecting the edges. Now you can also hold Shift A to get a quick selection, and we can then easily start selecting what I want. Then I'm going back to hold C and go to beveling. So we have a bevel node, and then we can start beveling these parts. Then what we could do is we could, for example, still play around with the shape, and I can use a transform node here. And we could, for example, scale this a bit down if you want to, or stretch this. So you can still tweak some of the look. So in this case, I'm just going to scale this a little bit down. So this looks great. And I'm also going to bevel here this edge, because I think this is quite hard edge. So let's just grab the bevel here as well and make this a little bit less hard edge. Then this model is almost finished, and what I will do is grab a boolean at the end here, and I'm going to use a box, and I'm going to use this to subtract from each other, so make sure it's set to subtract, and I will move the box at the top here rotate this a bit, and we could, for example, cut out a part like this to make the shape a bit more interesting. So we can always afterwards with Boolean add some more interesting shapes and break some of the parts. So what we're having now is the low poly version of my pillar, and later on I'm gonna make also a high poly version of this with some more details and round edges. So this part is done, and now I'm going to make this part, which is quite quickly modeled. So I'm gonna start out with a box. I'm also going to temporarily view my older model, just so I stay a bit consistent with the size. And let's just tweak this box over here so it has about the same height, and make it like this. And I'm gonna fine tune here the values a bit more, so I think 0.3. Then I'm going to put loops in here. So if you hold C again, you would have an option for edge loops, and I can place down a loop, for example, here. And if I do this again, I can place one here at the bottom as well. I can select the bottom primitive and then press E for scaling this, and I could, for example, scale this like that. I can also do the same then for the top part and scale it like this, so you have the main shape of that part. I can always still compare with my original pillar, and if I switch here to the right view, I could still start tweaking this if I want to. Like maybe this should be lower, like this. So it's easy then here, so we can quickly adjust the shape. So this part is also done. Now let's create some of these bottom parts here for my pillar. I'm gonna start out here with a tube for that. So place down a tube node. I'm going to set this to a polygon, close the caps, and we can then also adjust the radius. So I think 0.3 should be fine here as well. And also the height is going to then also be quite low, like this maybe. And we can then set the rows and columns to a specific number. So in this case, my number will be 16. And the reason for this number is because I'm going to pick very specific points. So I'm going to switch to top view and select these points. So I'm just going to skip a few, and then when I start scaling them, I'm going to create some more interesting shapes that I was looking for. And don't worry for the moment on these endguns, we will solve that later. So this is the shape that I was looking for. Might scale this a bit down. Can play around here with this as well, so it's not perfectly straight. Then selecting the bottom primitive, and I'm going to extrude this. I'm going to scroll my mouse to have an inset, and when I press Q on my keyboard, it will repeat the last node, so in this case the extrusion, and I can basically repeat this process. So every time I would press Q, I can then scroll with my mouse and drag out the shape. So something like this. This is how I got the main shape for that part. And then I just cut out 1/4 of it and then copy the rest if I need that. So in here what I did to cut the part out of it is use the clip node. Then we rotate this, and we then snap this on a specific angle, of course. And I'm going to copy the node again and then cut out this part here. So now I have this piece. Now to create the version that basically continues, I use this piece. So I just selected these points and I dragged those back in here. So then I use the dissolve flatten edges, plug that in over here, and then we just increase the main tolerance until we get rid of these lines. So now I have a perfect straight version out of this. This is then the model that is still left to do. What I did is I started out with a sphere, in this sphere, I'm going to set this to polygon mesh. And we're going to play around here with the rows and columns. So what if I set this to 3 by 3? Then we have this shape. But I think 3 by 4 will be better. So this will be the point part, the sharp part. And we can also here select this handle, and we could drag the shape out a little bit, like maybe to 1.5. Then I want to create some extra lines over here, and I want to bend this shape. So what I will do is I just going to select my model and go here to the knife tool. And then we can basically draw a plane where I want to cut. And I also want to force the direction to be a perfectly facing up one. So it's a nice line, and I can tweak this value. So I'm going to place it here on top. And for the rest, I'm just going to use an edge loop. And in the edge loop, we have here number of loops, and I can, for example, fill in here number 3. And now I can start bending this model, or you could, for example, also cut out the parts. Like we can use the clip here again to extract this part. And we can then, for example, bend the model. There are multiple ways on how you can get this result, of course. So in this case, let's just use the bend. So what I'm going to, most of the time, what is very useful is to set the region. So I'm going to switch here to front view in this case, click on set region capture, and I'm going to drag where I want to have my bending. So I want it from the bottom to the top, and it automatically is going to find these radius around your object, and then it bends nicely. We can also here set the different axes. So if you want to bend it in the x-axis, we can do it like this. In this case, I also want to enable the length scale and increase this as well. So you can see it makes it a bit more interesting. And then we can further around play with this shape. Go here to the bottom and maybe rotate this part a bit. And also I'm going to press C and use the polyfill. So this is basically going to be closed. Then I'm going to select this primitive here at the bottom. And I'm going to extrude this as well. And again, when pressing Q, we can repeat the last action used here in the viewport. And we could make something that looks like this. Now, next, I also want to make sure it matches with my other model. So I'm going to temporarily view here my model, and I can see I have not really accounted any scaling. So I'm going to grab everything I see here. I'm going to scale this down with an edit node. And the idea is that it would be placed up here, or it could be placed anywhere. But the idea is that it mainly is used there for the top. So in this case, I think it would be something like this. Maybe these outer points are maybe too far, so we can scale this down. And we can also use soft selection by scrolling with our mouse. So I don't change too much of my shape here. I can just use the soft selection. So we have that better in place. Then from the shape, I'm going to do another extrude. So again, selecting this face, extrusion. I'm going to make this big extrude over here, and I'm going to do another one. And in this extrusion here, let's add some more divisions, maybe 3. Then I'm going to adjust the shape, and I'm going to an edge mode, double click on the edge, and I'm going to scroll out my mouse, and I'm going to drag this over here. So it fits a bit what I'm looking for, like this. So you can tweak this as much as you want to until you have what you are looking for. So I'm going to drag this a bit more forward and drag it like this. And also here, let's make sure this is a bit better aligned. So this is then the main shape for this part as well. Now all these parts are now done for the low poly side. Let's just then think about the high poly. So what you can see here on these models is that they are sort of having these round edges, but also having a bevel. So you see that they are like having this beveled edge here that is also not consistent. So I'm going to replicate this effect in Houdini with the bevel node. So you can see that there is some beveling here, but it's a bit inconsistent. So what I will do for this is, first of all, I want to create more topology for my bevel. So I'm going to use a divide node, and I'm just quickly going to use the breaker polygon feature over here and disable my convex polygons. So don't triangulate the model, only use the breaker feature. Then lower down here this size, so maybe 0.1 can be nice. And we are going to apply a noise on this. So attribute noise. Now each point has a noise value. And instead of having this in the color, I want to store this in the P scale value. Now this noise is also a 1D noise. I don't need a 3D noise. And then we can also remap the value, which is quite useful. So it goes from 0 to 1. Then I can use the P scale value in my bevel. So I'm going to place down a bevel node. And then in here we can set a bevel range like this. It's a bit breaking the model. And then we use the node scaling and set it to scale by attribute. And we're going to use our P scale. Now, since with the divide node I added a lot of topology, I want to use the exclusions over here and ignore flattened edges. And we can increase this as much as we need to. And you can already see that we have some random beveling happening. So in this case, I want to fine tune a bit more what I have. And we can see that we have a quite random bevel going on. So as you can see now, we have a quite inconsistent beveling. So it goes from a bigger shape to a smaller shape like this. Now we'll also place down a fuse node here to clean up the shape. That might help sometimes. And then after this, I would start using the voxel node, so the voxel mesh node. And then we will create a voxel version out of this, which is then used for my high poly. So the topology will be increased, and we're going to set this to then a custom resolution. I'm going to also include bounding box relative and set custom preset and set it to 0.1, maybe a bit lower, 0.5. So you can lower this as much as you need to. We can also project to original and apply some smoothing depending on how much smoothing you want. So maybe just a little. And I hope you can see what we are looking for. So this effect of having this little bit sculpt feeling in there. But again, but also like you can see that we have a quite low resolution here. So we might have to increase the voxeling to maybe 0.002. Better. We might then increase the smoothness here. So it's a bit playing around with values until we have something that works well. So overall, this is quite interesting to play with to get some interesting values. Now basically this setup, I'm going to copy paste this then for each of these networks, for each of these models. I made a custom node called random beveling. And this node basically contains a attribute with the P scale and then the beveling using that P scale value, which we basically did here. So I can then easily set up this method here as well. And then I can play here with these values, ignore flattened edges, set this to the value I want to, and have the result I'm looking for. So here again is another model with this result. So we have random beveling going on, and we're gonna again voxel this as well. Now here one important thing is when we voxel this model, it will not give a nice result because the model is an open model. So what we can do is we can select this open edge and use the polyfill, and then a polyfill will then clean this up, but we have to set this to triangles. So when you set this to triangles, it would instantly like fill this up with triangles, and we have the result that we want to for voxeling. So I'm going to do the same here for this model. I'm going to select this, polyfill, and make sure we set this to triangles. So this will give the best result. So also make sure that other models are closed, so they don't conflict with voxel. Then these models can all then be merged together. So merge them over here. And now they are all placed at the same location. To space out all the models evenly, I'm going to use a transform node. This is just to make sure our models are not overlapping when we, for example, bake. So I'm going to place down a transform here, copy it here. And now I can be very consistent in how much space there is between each of them. So for example, we can say, I think 1 is enough. So then 1, 2, 3, and 4 in distance. So now they're all evenly spaced out. We can also see here that this one is not in the middle of the grid. So we could do a axis align here before we are moving it. So it's nicely in the center there. You could do an axis align on each of these networks if you want to. And I might actually set the axis align here where I created the original low poly for this. So this is sort of the high poly, and I'm going to use the voxel node that I had here and plug this in then here. So now we have a quite high topology here, and I think this could be enough for baking already, but if you want to have more polygons, then definitely increase the resolution. I can also hold my mouse button here, and I can see I have around 1 million primitives. We can definitely double this if you want to. So I'm going to create a null node and say this is my high. Then I'm basically going to copy all this and then connect all my low polygon models. So this is my main pillar. Then this is the other part. So these are then the low poly models. So important here is that they are overlapping on the right space. So often I would just compare them like this. I can definitely see here that they are nice on overlapping on each other. So this is then my low poly. And of course, a low poly needs unwrap. So we are going to use the auto UVing. I'm going to switch here to the UV network. You can find this here as well. And we're going to play around with some of these properties. So by default, it's going to set on UV seams. You can play around with some of the tolerance values to get more what you're looking for. And you can get quite good results with it. What I also like to do is sometimes switch to the other nodes, to the other options, which is, for example, UV unwrap, which can also do a pretty good job. So you're going to have to find one of these options that you prefer in the end. So I think I'm going to go with the seams and then tweak it to a certain value. And I think maybe something like this would be okay. Further here we have more packing options, merge small pieces, have specific rotations and so on, the padding, and further more options. Next up would be then assigning a normal. So right now we actually don't have any normal information. If I would look for the normal name, I don't see any normal. So we're going to place down a normal node, and we have the normal node, or we have the soften normals. With the soften normals, we have the option to look at the UV seams. So this can be useful for baking, is that it will smooth the normals based on the hardened UV seams. So this is then my output for the low poly. Just going to call this low. And from here, we have then a low and high poly. And I can choose to bake it in Houdini, or I could export everything and bake it in Substance Painter, for example. If you want to bake in Houdini, we grab the maps baker. Our first input will be then a low resolution, which is in this case this one, and then second input is the high resolution. We also have a third option here for custom cage, but most of the time low and high is the minimum you need to plug in, of course. Then here we have options from where is this saved, the resolution, the tracing mode, how far the tracing should go, and we can also preview a certain channel. In this case, I'm mainly interested in normal map, so I'm going to enable normals. And I'm going to visualize what's going on, and I can see that this maximum trace distance is way too large, and I'm going to set this to 0, 1. This is going to be better for the baking. So once we have a decent gauge for our baking, we can just simply press bake and then wait for the result. So most of the time this is going to be a quite fast bake, and by default is actually already sort of assigned these normal maps. You can see it a little bit in Houdini, but for the best visualization I would recommend checking it in Unreal itself. What we could also do is grab our quick material or a quick shade node, and in here we can then assign this normal map like here. So now I can see a bit better what's going on when it is baked, and overall I think it did a decent job there. So in case you want to, for example, export these models, what you would do is place down an FBX node. You can simply plug this in here, set a name and path to save this file, and then press the save button over here, and then you save it to this location. So I would often also save out the high and low poly if you want to texture this in Substance Painter. And that is how these models are made. So only difference here, of course, is that they have been textured, but the main structure here of the modeling is being used in Houdini. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and thank you for watching.